The interface between your rifle's barreled action and its stock is a critical component for a rifle that's going to shoot small groups and is going to shoot small groups consistently. Gavin Gear here from UltimateReloader.com. This is my lightweight 6.5 PRC full custom long range hunting rifle that I just finished the build on. I just published my first range trip to break in the barrel. You're going to want to check that video out because this rifle shoots awesome, and I saw clear evidence that my bedding job was a success. I want to talk about that bedding job and walk through that process. If you've been watching the channel, you know that I just went to Gordy Gritter's precision rifle building class at the Extreme Accuracy Institute, and this is yet another case where I've taken skills learned from that class, put them into practice, and gotten better results. Let me take the barreled action out of the stock and we'll kind of walk through the process. So the first thing that I did in my core build video, the barrel work and dry fitting video, I talk about some of the clearancing work that I did ahead of the bedding job. One of the things I had to do was do a little bit of clearancing work in the stock here where the bottom metal, this is a Red Snake Tactical bottom metal, went. I also did a little bit of clearancing work on the milling machine inside the trigger well because my Trigger Tech Special didn't quite have clearance there. Okay, so I'm going to take this barreled action and set it aside here. So I haven't yet fully finished this job on the stock. I have a little bit more evening up, some cosmetic alignment of the profile here where the barrel channel is, and I'm actually going to paint the interior black. Just as a final step, it's not something that anyone is going to see, but it's just kind of a nice thing to do to finish things. But before that process, you can really see kind of what I've done here. So there's really kind of two areas that I focused on for this stock job. The first was the barrel channel. What I noticed was I have kind of an extended barrel shank here compared to, I think, what the designers of this stock intended. I didn't even cut off the end of the barrel blank, I just faced it. And so I had insufficient clearance on the forward part of the barrel. So if you look at that dry fitting video, I used a drum sander and enlarged the channel. I also did a little bit of work on the milling machine with a custom ground bit. And so I wanted to make sure that I had good clearance and even gaps. Again, I got a little bit of touch-up work to do here. I'll paint it black and she'll be done. The second area that you want to take a really close look at is where the receiver is going to make contact with the stock. The main body of the receiver and the recoil lug. And I didn't have a whole lot of clearancing work to do here. I just did a little bit of profiling in a couple places, and then I also had some paint where the rear tang sits. So I took a small drum sander and I removed that paint, the finish, and got a nice roughed up carbon fiber surface for the bedding to adhere to. And because of how this stock is manufactured on a CNC milling machine or router, something like that, it's nice and roughed up and it's got this carbon fiber surface that's going to accept the epoxy well. If you have something like a plastic stock, you're going to want to rough that up. Or some wood stocks, you're going to want to make sure that you have a good mechanical interface between that epoxy and the stock itself. And really what you want to do when you're looking at this clearancing is you want to take the barreled action or just the receiver, and you want to have it sit in place and just kind of lock and just sit flat. It's not going to rock. Pull it back and forward. Make sure that everything is seating as good as possible before the bedding. Now the bedding is going to make sure that that is a completely solid platform. And really the goal is to get the receiver to sit in place in the stock and to be able to torque it down without distorting the action. If there's any unevenness, if there's any bumps, ridges, anything like that, you can definitely distort the action and put it under stress when you torque those action screws. When you fire the rifle, the forces, you're talking upwards of 60,000 pounds per square inch inside the chamber. The forces are immense, and that's going to cause the action to flex, and that's going to cause a vibration to go down the barrel, and that's going to cause shot dispersion. Definitely not what you want. Sometimes you'll see things walk around if the receiver can walk sideways, like on a flat bottom, like on a Winchester Model 70, something like that. All sorts of things can go on, but if you do a good bedding job, you can prevent those issues from coming up. So once I had the stock fit, and I was happy with the fit between the receiver, the stock, I had good barrel clearance. Mostly, I did the dollar bill trick. I was a little tight on one side. I'll talk about that in just a moment. I was ready to get to business with the epoxy. And for this job, what I'm using is MarineTex Gray. MarineTex, as the name implies, is for marine work. You could have the hull of a boat or something like that and fill in fiberglass, do all sorts of stuff, and then grind it, sand it, those sorts of things. But it's really good for different types of bedding tasks. For this rifle, I used it not only for bedding the barreled action into the stock, but I also used it to bed the scope body to the bottom scope rings. I'll cover that in the next video when I talk about the Leupold Mark V. And what you do is you mix 5 parts of the epoxy with 1 part by volume of a catalyst, this catalyst right here. And I just use popsicle sticks, mix it on a pad of paper. It's not the most elegant way to do it, but when you're done, you can just tear off the top and chuck it in the garbage. Then I take the popsicle sticks and very carefully dab the epoxy kind of all over the place. In the past, the mistake I've made is to be too sparing. I don't want to do the cleanup job, whatever the reason is. And what you can do is you can end up with voids. And what you want is for the receiver to press down and for it to kind of goop the epoxy out of the way, and for hopefully any air bubbles to work themselves out as the epoxy is flowing. That's the theory. So you want to make sure that you get behind where the recoil lug is going to sit. I had taped the side and the front of the recoil lug because in this case I'm looking at just the back contacting and then the receiver body. That's going to hold it in place angularly and kind of in all axes. So in addition, before you set the barreled action in place, you need some sort of a mold release. Some sort of a coating that's going to release the epoxy and not adhere to it. I use Hornady One Shot, which is a case lubrication for loading typically pistol cartridges, that sort of thing. And it works really good. You can just spray on a coat or two, and that's pretty much all you have to do. Also, make sure to spray the action screws as well, because those are going to go up through the epoxy, and you don't want the epoxy to stick to those threads. That would be a bad scenario. So with the recoil lug taped and with the One Shot in place, I set the barreled action into place. And when you do that, you want to be careful. You know, you get the trigger was not installed at the time. Get everything going down and slightly forward. I'm talking like 1/8 of an inch maybe, and then push it back against where the recoil lug seats. That's going to basically squish that epoxy in place, hopefully work out any air bubbles, and then hand tighten the action screws to a very, very minimal torque, just so that you can start to feel the torque increase. Here's the key part. Now we're going to back that torque off, all of it, because we don't want to impose any stress on that action. We don't want to distort it, and it takes probably less than you would think to do so. So by relaxing the screws, the epoxy can flow in place, and as it cures, that's going to create a perfect distortion-free bed for the barreled action. And it's really the recoil lug and the action itself that we're talking about here. You can bed forward of the recoil lug. That's going to be a special scenario. There's reasons to do it, reasons not to. For this build, I'm just doing epoxy from where the recoil lug sits against the stock backwards all the way to the rear tang area. Then it's time for some cleanup. You want to make sure that you have a bunch of Q-tips on hand. Very carefully remove all of the excess around where it has squirted out, and you should see it squirting out pretty much everywhere. If you don't see it anywhere, that's probably a sign that you used too little. And you can always skim coat it and rebed it. That's not usually a problem, but it's best to do it right all in one shot. You can use a little bit of vinegar. I use a little bit of paint thinner to kind of do a final clean on those components. You reach up into the mag well and use Q-tips to clean up around where the receiver sits against that opening. And then it's time to wait. I cranked up the heat in the room of the shop where I was doing this work and waited a full 24 hours. Then it's time to back off the action screws and probably use the front of the barrel to kind of tip things just a little bit until you hear it pop, and then it should come out straight away. And I could tell right away that the fit was really good because when I would set the barrel to action, you could just almost hear it snap into place. And the test is to install both action screws and to have them basically finger tight, a little bit of torque to the rear one, and then torque the front action screw and hold the barrel against the fore end of the stock. You shouldn't feel any movement. If you want to get really precise with things, you set it up in a vise, clamp the stock in the vise, and put an indicator on the barrel, and then torque the action screw and look for needle movement. You should see very little or none. And the less, the better. Now, the ultimate test of this bedding job was I was shooting during the barrel break-in, and I was seeing horizontal, and I knew I had a tight spot over here on the fore end for the barrel channel. I should have taken care of it initially, but I did have a gap, and I thought it was enough. Well, it wasn't. So I went down to the shop real quick, and I took the barreled action out. I increased the clearance on that side, and then very carefully set the barreled action in place, torqued the action screws while tapping on the bench to get everything seated perfectly. May not be necessary with a good bedding job, but I do that anyway. Torque the action screws down. I apply more to the front and less to the rear. I do it by feel. It's going to be somewhere around 60 inch-pounds in the front and something less in the rear. I'm guessing 30, 35, probably something like that. That front action screw should be the critical action screw. That's where all the business is going on. Went back out to the range. The very next 3 shots were cloverleaf less than a 1/4 inch. I was shooting 3-shot groups and then cleaning, 3-shot groups and then cleaning. Right after the removal and reinstallation of the barreled action. That tells me that this bedding job is spot on, which is great. So if you're going to take on a bedding job, I think this is a great way to go. Just make sure you take your time. Make sure you have adequate clearance. Make sure you've got good seating and use enough product. You can, after the fact, use a drift punch and punch out the epoxy plugs that are going to go into your trigger pin holes. It's not a problem as long as you've used the right release agent. Some people use shoe polish, some people use wax. There's commercial products for this kind of thing, but the Hornady One-Shot has treated me well. And the great thing with this job is I did not get any air bubbles, and it works, obviously, based on the range results that I saw. So when you get a good aesthetic and you get good performance, I'm totally happy. Now, make sure you're subscribed with notifications because in the next video, I'm going to conclude this build series by talking about the Leupold Mark V. Unboxing, installation, bedding the scope body to the rings. Turned out great. What do you think of this build? What do you think of this bedding process and this bedding job? Please leave a comment. Now, don't forget, I got Ultimate Reloader t-shirts at the store. I'm on Patreon. I got an article with more information about this, first link in the video description. Links for Patreon and the Ultimate Reloader store as well. Until next time, happy shooting and happy reloading.